Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of July 29th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Dave Rodgerson. Happy to be with you here today.
And this podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. So it's the hazy, crazy days of summer, and what better time to invite friends and colleagues in the retail industry to join me on the Voice of Retail and share perspectives about the retail news of the week.
Thanks for inviting me, Mike. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to get into today.
But first, we kick off with a most excellent roundtable interview recorded live at Retail Council of Canada Store 2019 in the Purolator Podcasting Studio with retail tech gurus and Q Division leaders and fellow podcasters Manolo Almagro, Ben Gauthier, and Michael Arnett from Stratacache. We talk Goldilocks, retail tech, overhyped, underhyped, and tech that's just right. Then Dave and I will look at the retail news of the week, but first, let's listen to my interview with Manolo, Ben, and Michael. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the Purolator Podcast Studio at Store 2019. How are you doing today?
Fantastic.
Great. Fantastic.
Great. Thanks for having us on.
So we got a great round table here. So let's, I don't usually do this. Usually I just welcome you. But let's introduce yourselves as we go.
Okay.
We'll go around the table and tell me who you are and what's your favorite color?
Ben Gauthier, partner at Q Division. Favorite color, I guess, would be blue.
All right.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
You seem tentative on that.
Well, no, yellow.
Exactly.
Right there. He says blue because he's looking at the microphone that says blue. Just
sure.
Power suggestion.
Sure.
My name is Manolo Almagro. I'm also a managing partner at Q Division. I'm the only non-Canadian in this room, which feels a little weird to me. And,
well, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Though. Thank you for having me. And my favorite color is black, if that's a color. Is that a color?
Yes.
Or it's absence of color, but there you go.
And I'm Michael Arnett with the parent company of Q Division called Stratacache. My favorite color is blue, but I'll put an asterisk on that because I also like purple.
All right. Now that we got that out of the way. Well, listen, thanks again for joining me. Manolo, you were here talking to retailers about retail technology and something I love dearly. Sometimes I understand it, sometimes I don't, and I think sometimes retailers are in more or less the same boat. I just did an interview with Willie Crew, who's been, leading, advising retailers for 30 years, and we talked about technology a bit, right? We talked about, what is it that retailers need to do? What are you hearing, and what do you advise retailers when they think about technology? And tell me more about Q Division and a little bit of your background, so we know who you are, so kind of a roundabout way to get to. Why don't we start with how you approach technology, how you approach retail, and the intersection of those two things?
Sure. So, really, it's about solving problems. When we kind of go through and work with our clients about what kind of technology, they usually come in and have they want to do the cool thing. They want to skip a couple steps and kind of just deploy something that's out there. Whereas it's like we kind of try to take them a couple of steps back, make sure you outline the problem. So once you've outlined the problem, you can find the right technology, and then you've kind of put it for the right kind of mode for success.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's the bright, shiny object syndrome we always get into. It's like, oh, I saw this thing in the Amazon Go store. And we're like, okay, but let's step back a bit. First thing we always ask is, what's your customer journey? Or do you even have a map of it so we can see where the opportunities would go? I think the other thing we do as far as our approach is we say, don't look inside your industry. Don't benchmark yourself with other retailers. For instance, we do a lot of work with airports. You would think, okay, what does the airport have to do with retail? Well, it has a lot to do because they are starting to benchmark themselves against retail experiences as well as amusement parks like Disney, and how they manage wait times and queue times and things like that is another area. So we like to bring in from other industries what we've learned, technologies we've used, and then say, here's how they solved it. We see an opportunity there.
You know what I love about the analogy with Disney is their parking lot queuing system, and the lesson you learn about no matter how good your day was. You could have the best day in the life with the family, but if you can't find where you park the car, your day's ruined.
So true,
right? Kids are crying, everybody's tired at that point, and they've got this queue. Well, okay, I totally can't remember whether it was in Goofy or Donald or whatever. What time did you arrive? And they pretty much know, based on what time you arrive, where the spots are. And I think that lesson is, the transition, carries over different industries. Is no matter how good you are, 99% of the experience, that 1%, and 1% could be some kind of other fail in any kind of different way. So speaking of stepping back, let's step back and understand Q Division a little bit better. Tell me what's that all about. What's your mandate? What do you do? Where are you based? Like what's your scope of work?
So for me, I'm based out of Chicago.
Okay.
I work out of the Chicago office. Manolo's out of the brisket capital of the world, Austin.
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. Big Franklin barbecue fan.
That's right.
Though I've never been, it is one of my.
I'll have to send you some.
One of my journeys.
When Manolo moved down there, I said you have to make friends with Aaron Franklin, and so you can invite me.
I'm not getting up at 3 a.m. to get in line
Just
for
make
you.
friends with
It's passion, man. There's a lot of passion around barbecue. Good lessons for us in retail too.
Exactly.
So, but for us, Q Division itself, like we look at ourselves in like 3 different ways. One is it's for being a partner with, or like being a subsidiary of Stratacache. It's about helping their clients, their current clients, keep up with trends and things that are happening in retail. So Manolo and I go to a lot of conferences and speak at a lot of different conferences to see what's out there, work with a lot of emerging technology companies to see what new things are happening, where behaviors are going with those technologies. So the other one would be about evaluating technologies for investment and maybe purchase in some way. And then it's for our own clients. And we kind of have been talking about being like, or just viewing ourselves more as like a fractional innovation officer in some kind of way. So it's helping companies.
Fractional innovation officer.
So it's like helping companies that need to get over that innovation hump, like we can actually get them and accelerate them into that kind of space.
Right, and that has a lot to do with most innovation initiatives have a lifespan, right? 2, 3, 4 years, and they've got a lot of roadmap to fill. And usually they don't have enough resources to do that. Not from a money perspective, it's just people.
Cycles, as we would say,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And so what we do is we'll come in and say, okay, what's your objective? We, from a quarterly perspective, one of the things we've done before is help stand up an innovation lab. Or labs, depending upon, like we had this one solution where the headquarters was in one city and then the sales office was in another, so we sent, we had 2 labs basically. And the labs were focused on being mobile. You could drop it into the corporate headquarters or a specific client and put it in where all of the C-level folks could kind of participate in it as well.
I've seen big retailers, and Kroger comes to mind, and Walmart most recently with Walmart Labs. You know, Kroger's Sunrise Technologies. It feels like the very big retailers are saying, you know, I can't figure out innovation. I need to have a core team that keeps the stores open, which is heavy lifting enough these days between cyber threats and just, you know, keeping pace with technology that just runs the core, just takes the dollar bill. Are you seeing more of that, and where do you kind of, how do you advise retailers? Or maybe that's where you fit in this fractional piece, is like, you know, these big retailers spin off a whole separate division whose mandate is to innovate.
Yes.
I've seen that go south before because they go off in crazy directions that aren't anchored into the business strategy. But I think both Kroger and Walmart, I think, are doing a better job or a good job of that. They're still kind of anchored to the mission.
Yes.
Target. What other examples do you see of that, and where do you?
Well,
is that just the thing for the big retailers to do?
That's true. Well, it's the money aspect. I mean, they are running 2 initiatives, or dual innovation. They're doing the initiatives of what the future stores and future revenue streams are going to be. Sounds like there's a bomb going to go off.
No, that's it. They're demonstrating our. No, this is Canada. Isn't it?
That's right.
No, that's just some equipment, man.
Oh, okay.
Everybody's chill here.
That's right. The other half is maintaining the operations side.
Right.
But they also have these incremental enhancements to the customer experience that they have to do just to keep people coming back, right? So they have really 2 tracks. And a lot of times we'll get brought in for the alternative track, which is I want to focus on customer engagement in the specific channel. And so we'll say, okay, funny you should say that because we just saw 3 of those when we were in Barcelona last week or something like that. We work with the Stratacache company because they have offices in 19 countries, and it allows us to have a global visibility into a lot of the initiatives and stuff that's happening other places. And so we draw upon that as well. It kind of gives us the broader view. And then I think also we get leaned on a lot by the innovation officer that's in place, because he's like, wow, at least, he can kind of set us off when we go. And to your point, we always kind of stress, you need to make sure that you have a plan for bringing this back into the main operations of the company, or this becomes that flagship that just sits there, or that initiative that never went anywhere. And I'll use Lowe's as an example, because they recently came out with some very poor numbers recently, and the CEO actually admitted, they had upgraded a lot of the experiences inside the store with technology, robots, things like that, but the infrastructure about gathering information about the products, what people are paying or what would they pay, was not updated in a timely manner. I mean, they eventually did it, but what they did was they made decisions based on the data that had latency behind it, so it wasn't accurate. And so therefore they priced themselves and made negotiations with their suppliers that threw everything off. And so suddenly people aren't going to pay that much because they raised all the prices and things like that. So it's kind of that balance we talk about.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've got a technology that you just want to test and kind of throw out there for a small isolated one, you can do that with a lot of different kinds of things. But if you want to kind of build that to scale, your foundation needs to be in there. And that's the stuff that for Lowe's didn't happen. And so when we kind of go in, it's like, is it just about like almost fun, like trying to see those shiny things? Or if you're solving a problem, how can you actually get it to scale? Like, what is your rollout plan for those?
I sometimes, and I've been on the retail side, and I talk about the diseconomy of scale. So when I launched Hudson'sBayCompany.com, HBC.com in 2000, back in the go-go days, I was talking to my counterpart at Macy's, and we agreed we were spending the exact same amount of money. And, in the U.S. market, it's 10x in terms of customers and even propensity to shop online. Is there a way to overcome this diseconomy of scale? And then the bigger scheme, you just can't outspend the Amazons of the world. You can't outspend them from a technology perspective. So is there a way to square that circle where you can still have innovation and keep up with people who have vastly more resources than you do? Is it just being clever about it and very mission driven?
I think so. I don't know. You can speak to it if you want. But
No, you're wrong. I'm just kidding.
Because this happened, there was someone, I forget the company, but this was at NRF this past year. We were running tours, and he was the last one, and so I was like, you've just got me, I'll be your consultant for an hour and a half, and we'll just walk around the floor and we can just talk. And he was from overseas, he had a bunch of department stores, and he was losing all this business to all these online companies, and they did not even have a website. And so he was like, should I invest all this money in a website? And I felt like, I think you've missed it. You've missed that time. If you invest that, what are you going to do? You're going to be just kind of the same as everyone else. I said to kind of look into what's differentiating your business. What's different? What makes you special with your customers? And then how are you going to apply that into kind of that experience?
Go ahead.
I also think that we talk about retail as a service, which was one of the themes we talked about today in the session. But that's another way to keep up, because you don't necessarily... there's a lot of places where not invented here paralyzes any progress that happens, right? Because they want to take everything in-house, they want it to be proprietary, but the reality is there are a ton of companies out there that you can subscribe to their services. And
do you find that changing? Do you find that over time? We've all been doing this for a little bit. Are you finding that kind of the SaaS models are being more accepted? I don't know how you keep pace without them.
Right. You can't. But I think the direct-to-consumer trend, all of those brands are case studies in itself, right? Because they come from online only, so e-commerce first. They figured out all of their customer needs and understand their behaviors. But now they have to get into the retail space. And they're not going to go into a big retailer. They're not going to go to a Target or a Walmart because they'll get lost.
Right.
So they're like, we're just going to build our own. And so what's one of the hardest things to do? Find a location. Well, there's a retail as a service partner for that. they'll find you a place, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be a full-fledged store. You can get a desk or a small 4x4 space, like at Beta, which is one of the tech companies slash service companies we've seen, and they'll rent you things for under $4,000 a month, and you can get inside of a Macy's because they're inside of Macy's. I mean, that kind of reach, and then you also get the back end system. So I think
it's got to be like the service model is just the way that. It's a way that you accelerate, and it's not. You could be like with like a Salesforce or some other big company that's got like all of the pieces, but there are a lot of companies that are just different pockets that are integrated. That you could pick like a best of breed for something, and then maybe not if you're not focused in on another one. Just like if you didn't want a chatbot, say, to be able to know where your package was at any point in time or something like that, you can kind of cut that out and just not do it. But there are just so many things out there that whenever a new technology or new things like AI that's kind of come out, all the things that we're seeing from like facial recognition and computer vision, all of that stuff, it's all just accelerating so fast that it's becoming commodity in that software.
And you can change it out. That's the best part. I mean, it's not necessarily going to impact your experience so badly because a lot of them have a commonality and functions.
So here's a question for you. Tell me what, in your opinion, is the most overhyped technology, and then tell me, in your experience, what is the most underestimated technology. I often speak about the forces of digital transformation: AI, chatbots, blockchain, 5G. We can go through. So the most impactful versus the most overhyped.
Like a blockchain.
Overhyped. I think it has promise in the industry, but I think that there are more cost-effective approaches to take today. And, I would let it be on somebody else's dime to build out a blockchain, because today most of the blockchains are proprietary anyway. It's not necessarily going to help much.
The one I like, I speak about is IBM's and their food blockchain.
Yes,
to help solve food transparency and accountability and food fraud. That seems to be one that's the only one. I don't fully understand blockchain on any given day, but that's the one that seems to anchor it for me, that says, there's a practical
the concept is there. It's just, to me, like how you would roll that out and scale that is crazy. And to actually, like, when you start to boil it down, what a lot of these service companies are doing, like, is it even really a blockchain anymore? Is it just a database now? And that's Amazon. I think it was like 6 months ago. They basically said that in their developer conference. They were like, we have a blockchain one if you want to do it, but if you're really just doing something that's a database, we've got one that's like this internal closed blockchain-like thing that's basically going to be a lot easier to deploy.
And the core thing about blockchain is transparency, which I don't think any brand or retailer is ready to do yet. I just think culturally it's not in their DNA to be 100% transparent with their suppliers.
So, all right, well, let's talk about the most impactful. Like, what is it? And we can talk about. I was talking to a retailer, and we were talking about AI, and for them, a practical use case was using and harnessing its predictive power to help them assortment plan, and then to figure out what products go where. So that if you can define it with whatever AI is, because that's a bit of a slippery slope as well, right? But that, in my mind, is one of the things that's actually underestimated, that its impact. What do you guys think?
Oh, I agree, but it's just the offshoots of it. So think about like the AI that's going into, I think, once autonomous vehicles get out there, like that's going to disrupt everything. Then I've got supply chain running to my house. Then things like you don't have to worry about manpower for like all the deliveries.
And we're seeing some pilots of that in the U.S. Like back to Kroger, I think they're piloting something in Phoenix where they've got self-driving cars. I think the real step forward for retailers and supply chain, as you mentioned, is when you have 43, 54-foot trucks driving down the street, driving down the highways. That feels like that's where it's really good.
And there's also infrastructure.
Come out and deliver it to my house.
That's right. I mean, we're all expecting drones to drop stuff off at our house, but now it's autonomous.
I want Atlas to kind of parquet his way to my house and then just give me something.
I want to build it all. I have a vision in the future where we just get the raw materials and I have a replicator at my house that just builds everything.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
Oh, sorry, didn't we have that with like 5 years ago? Wasn't that?
Yeah,
The
that was
3D
supposed
printing?
to be-
3D printing? Didn't that happen already?
Yeah, well, all you could make was a pizza. I don't think you could do much more.
I think that came and went, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so what else did we talk about? What else did you talk about? What else did you share
We
today?
talked a lot about machine vision, and I think that's the category of AI. But I think that is the most underestimated one.
Tell me more. Machine.
Well, machine vision often turns into facial recognition, right? That's the first place people go, and then privacy comes up.
Sure.
Like in San Francisco, they just
banned
passed
it,
a
right?
law.
They just passed
But
a law.
For police.
for police.
The government.
The government can't use it, but brands and retailers can do it all day long.
Right.
And I think that, there's that New York Times experiment they did where they used public video feeds from all over the city because they all have all the CCTV.
Yeah.
And then they ran it on Amazon's AWS recognition. So it was a facial recognition neural network. But then what they did was they took LinkedIn profiles of everyone that works in the neighborhood of that camera, and they were able to identify somebody. And they used a credit card, so $100 and all that technology ready to go. And they were able to do it in under a week. So to me, that says we're at this place where 2 years ago, it was tough for AI or machine vision to tell the difference between a puppy and a muffin because they look very similar, right? And you would have to train it. I mean, there's still a lot of work to training.
Well, there's a whole discussion on ethics and training data.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
And racial bias. I mean, that's also a big
But
thing.
that's all going to get ironed out.
Exactly.
you think?
Oh, yeah.
You think?
Yeah. And if not, I mean, here's, ultimately...
And what I worry about in that is there's this propensity to say, well, the machine said it was so it must be so.
Right.
That's
Right.
why it was banned in San
You
Francisco.
still need
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to replace people, but you do. I mean, here's the way I look at it. China has the opposite of what we have from human rights. So look how advanced their AI and machine vision has become because people don't have a choice. Like, that's just the way it's going to be. Here, we have this crazy thing called privacy,
Yeah.
maybe, and that's kind of pulled us back from any kind of real models that can train from it.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of time. It's getting better. In the past 18 months, huge advances in machine vision, and I think that's just going to continue. The more people use it, the smarter.
So for retailers, tell me one or two practical uses, if we can call it practical, but I can see uses in retail stores for LP from machine vision, right? Well, give me one or two other kind of use cases that would kind of, support your enthusiasm about it from a, wow, this is underestimated.
So it's the idea, to be able to kind of go into the personalization aspect, seeing an example that's not in retail, but you can kind of see what would end up happening from it is Google's developer conference for their, I keep forgetting the name. Is it a Nest? Like their screen?
Nest.
So
they
it's got
combined
a
everything.
camera on top, and when you walk into the room and it sees your face, it starts putting up your information. So you could be in a family and you just start seeing your stuff. So
Kind of
it's
the
starting to
good
be
part of
person-
Minority Report.
Right.
Exactly.
Not the bad part.
Not the bad part.
Not the,
but it's
bad.
about
Not the pre-crime
idea-
part. But
No.
hey, there's an ad that...
But that's San Francisco. Stop the pre-crime stuff, right? So-
No
That's,
pre-crime stuff.
that's the personalization aspect that I see as something that could kind of just be, it would be a game changer.
kind of
I
breakthrough in
think
experience.
It has the propensity to disrupt things like RFID and how we use it, right? Because right now we're using it like for lift and learns. When you pick something up, it personalizes the stuff around you or the screen that's there, but that's based on an RFID or
Right.
NFC something. But if you use a camera or a camera sensor and machine vision, it has a lot more information. I mean, part of the other problem is there's limitations to how that technology works. If you put that thing down in the wrong place, it doesn't know the difference. Whereas this has more accuracy.
Yeah.
Right.
It's easier to train. It can do more complex tasks because it can say, he picked up the object, he picked it up and looked at it this way or turned it this way. Like there's more behavioral information that we can garner from this kind of technology.
I just think of like all the sensors that we've always talked about going into stores and all these things to kind of give that aspect for the data that's collected when you could just put in a camera and collect all the data that way as to
Right.
how pick this up and what a
Amazon
what
Go
says.
type, camera vision stuff, right?
And it can go in your phone. Like that's the other part is it's not just part of the physical environment that you're in, but you could use your phone and point at something and give you information on it. I mean, there's all sorts of tests right now that Amazon and Google and Snapchat are all doing.
So Michael, I've done a terrible job of getting you in the conversation, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Wait, let me wake him up first. Okay.
He's listening. He's calmly listening. Very good, Mike. So we're 3/4 of the way through first day at store. You've seen some sessions. What's your early observation so far? Anything jump out at you other than, of course, present company accepted?
Well, it's interesting that we just used the word personalization a minute ago. That sounds so basic and so simple. Yet, in all of our experiences in everyday life as consumers, we tend to have these experiences that we remember, that we suffer from. So I'll share one with you. I won't name the retailer in particular, but it wasn't my experience, but it was my wife's experience. Thus, it became kind of de facto my experience.
You heard about it.
Yeah, I certainly did. It was at a very large retail chain, and we had a shopping cart full of things. And at checkout, the cashier looked at our very beautiful child, and we get stopped a lot, who is just past an infant, and looked at my wife.
It's funny when you get congratulated for having beautiful kids, right? Like
it is, yes.
It's just a funny thing. Congratulations! Like, what do you say? Hey, thanks. We saved up, right? To make them attractive. And so
Indeed. So she looked at my wife, who is, I would say, would qualify as being a very beautiful, visible minority, and she looked at our child, who happens to be less so a visible minority, and said, "Oh wow, what a beautiful child! That can't be yours." And for a breastfeeding mother to hear that, she was so offended, and we have not set foot back in that environment for several months. And we're talking a few $100s, but that's just us. And that can be so easily preventable, right? All that had to be was have a nice day or service with a smile. So it's interesting that we're focusing a little bit more on the technology side because that's kind of our bread and butter.
Yeah.
But we can't overlook the power
still a people
of the
business,
human
right?
element.
Still a people
Absolutely.
business. Still a people business.
Yeah.
So as we think forward, we talk about this being a people business. We talk about people, technology, process, and the classic paradigms. 1 to 3 words of advice for retailers thinking about the challenges that face them. What would be your top 3 things you'd want to say as you leave in their final minutes together? What are those nuggets that you'd want to convey?
I'll start on this one. Don't proceed with technology for technology's sake. You need to have a why behind it. The WHY. It's such a powerful question, yet so simple. And I don't see enough of that out there. I see some poor implementations of technology, and it really needs to be thought through a little bit more strategically.
I would say look outside the industry, your own industry, for the real innovation. I think that's core.
You mentioned airports and entertainment and all kinds of different things. Right?
Somewhere along the line, they've solved a problem that may be the same as or close to what you've done. Plus, there's also ways that you can just find interesting mashups of technology and experiences that would be very unique, and that's what people want, unique experiences.
Okay.
I had the most time to kind of think about it, and my thing, I don't know, like I understand, because we like to say that we're trying to solve a problem, and so that's what we kind of use technology for, but it's also not to get hamstrung, and don't be afraid to test and learn from those tests, and also to learn if it's not working, to figure out why it's not working. And so like to kind of try things out, maybe in small ways, but with the mindset of moving forward, not to like go and then kill.
Right.
There are things to kind of learn as to what is working and then why isn't it, that kind of stuff.
Well, it's a pithy kind of question, so thanks for kind of entertaining me. You know, I summarize entire the world of all your experience in 3 things. All right, so how can listeners get a hold of you? You guys have a podcast. Talk about that, and then how do we get a hold? How if they're interested and want to learn more? How do they do that?
The podcast is called Q's Tech Briefing, which it's patterned after the Q division in James Bond. So every week we drill down in specific technologies, explain how we could use it, and then Ben has this thing which I call Ben-splaining because he breaks himself down, and it really gets tedious. No, I'm just kidding. It's really good. And then you can go to our website. Yes, it is. Yes, especially when he hijacks it. And then you can go to our website, qdivision.us.
qdivision.us, and you're on all the usual podcast platforms.
Yes, iTunes, Google, Spotify. That's it so far.
Yes.
All right.
So we've got weekly videos that we started putting out, and we're going to be doing.
Oh yeah, that too. I forgot that.
Oh, that's neat. All right.
Just from what happened in the week of tech, like just a good 1-minute video, just a quick briefing of what.
Good snapshot.
Yep.
Well, thank you to each and every one of you for joining me on the
thank
Voice
you so
of
much
Retail
for having
podcast.
us. Very much.
Thank you for coming up. Welcome and welcome back to Canada.
Oh, thank you.
Enjoy your time while you're here. I look forward to joining you, Manolo, at Franklin's Barbecue next time I'm
Absolutely.
in Austin. Of course, I'm going to ask you to wait in line at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to come around at 9
I'll send
or
my
10.
son. He's just sit there.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks to Manolo, Ben, and Michael for being such good sports and for being my guests this week. Now let's hit the highlights in retail this week. E-newsletter, biggest retail weekly newsletter, e-newsletter in Canada. You can subscribe on retailcouncil.org. And it's a real treat for me today. This is a standard thing I do as kind of a companion piece, but now I have Dave. Dave, you still there with me?
I sure am, Mike.
So the technical gremlins prohibited Dave and I from actually being in the same place at the same time to be together. So Dave joins me from Northern Ontario, what I consider Northern Ontario, which isn't really Northern Ontario. Dave, you and I have known each other, 20-some years. We've done tours in New York together, so it's a real treat to get your additional perspectives on retail this week. Let's just jump right in. So the first article that we're going to talk about, I look at Sage. They reaps benefits from the rise in natural products demand. They've added, this from Business in Vancouver, added 33 BC-based retail employees to the ranks, the most of any company from BC. What a success story that Sage is, eh, Dave?
Oh, well, Sage is just another great example of those small and medium-sized retailers that are really finding their way in the West Coast. And I'm looking forward to hearing Janet when she speaks at the Retail West event in Vancouver later this year. Yeah.
We're Retail Council is very fortunate in having some of the leadership team share some of that wisdom and insights. I mean, they've been so good at carving out a distinct niche in what is a pretty crowded category. But good for them, and I think they've been able to ride the wave of essential oils and other plant. I mean, but that wave ends pretty quick, right? I mean, just because you start there doesn't mean you're going to finish there. So congratulations to our friends at Sage, and of course, with last names like LeBlanc, I can wish them only even more best of luck. From Bloomberg, this from the U.S., they're really giving some good coverage to Aritzia, right? I mean, Dave, what do you think of Aritzia? I mean, what can you say about Brian and the team that he's running there? Is fantastic, really.
Brian Hill is one of the most interesting retail leaders to listen to. You and I have seen him speak many times at the Retail Council of Canada's event store. We've also seen him out west at some of the events there. Aritzia is a very proud Canadian brand, and now with such a presence around the world, I think it's something that the industry can really point to and say this is a great thing for Canadian retail. I
was listening to his interview on the main stage back with Joe Mimram, and he's basically talking about, how does a company, it's such pragmatic advice, how does a company scale? And, they can be ahead of the curve in some things, but if they're too far ahead of the curve, I think he's talking about technology. If they're too far ahead of the curve in spending on technology, they get into a bit of trouble. So, I talked about this Goldilocks. How do you find, and Manolo and Ben and I just in their interview talked about, how do you find that right sweet spot where you're not over-investing, particularly important for a Canadian company, though they're now international. And this article is about their Meghan Markle's go-to boutique. So that's a pretty good thing for anyone to be. So congratulations to our friends at Aritzia, for sure.
Absolutely.
So Le Chateau is entering the U.S. market. So the headlines in this from Craig Patterson's Retail Insider. We all know Craig Patterson. Dave, you and I know Craig well. Le Chateau's been around for quite a while. So the title is actually a bit sends you in a bit of a different direction. They're actually going to be doing some business to business sales. So it's interesting that that brand is trying to look south, as many brands have in our time together. Try to get growth in the big market. Yeah, go ahead.
That's where the economy of scale comes, especially for companies who have to play in we have a limited market here in Canada.
Yeah.
So being able to extend, to grow into that U.S. market, as you say, from a business perspective as well, is a great way for them to find their way into that marketplace.
Well, it's kind of a bit of the secret sauce. I mean, Aritzia, Sage, Aritzia particularly has been growing in the U.S. and it is Indigo's opened up a store now in New Jersey. So there's lots of examples. Of course, Lululemon, another great example of a company that's expanded into the U.S. internationally with success. Others have been less successful, so we wish them all the best of luck, of course. The next one is about Cannabis New Brunswick. So Laura Wood, great, fantastic leader. They won Excellence in Retail Awards this summer for their training. And now this is interesting, right? I mean, you've got some exposure over the time to these new cannabis companies, I think, Dave. I mean, really, there's a lot of innovation happening in and around all the rules that they have to deal with, eh?
There are. And as I've talked with some of these retailers, Aurora, for example, the best of them are taking the lead and working with the government to help set these regulations because they're evolving. They're still trying to find their way. And I think the companies that go out of their way to work with the government, like Aurora, like Cannabis at New Brunswick, these are the ones that are going to find their way ahead of the competition.
Well, good for them. I mean, they did this first pop-up, and it's Cannabis New Brunswick has really been leading the way. I mean, there's lots of lessons to be learned still from the cannabis industry. For example, she was sharing that they really have underachieved online because a lot of people still want to go in the store and buy the product. They're not familiar with the brands. So it's interesting that they did a pop-up. And what particularly is interesting for me, and you and I have talked about this, is how complex it is just to navigate around those rules and do this pop-up. So, you have got to have, separate POS, and you've got to have a whole bunch of other things that are mandated. So congratulations to Cannabis New Brunswick, that from the growth up. So speaking of crazy, lazy, I don't know, whatever kind of days, Capital One, big theft. I don't know, Dave, what can we say about this? 106 million people affected, million Canadian SIN numbers. I mean, what do we think about this?
106 million people are asking the question, who's in my wallet?
30 gigs of data. The FBI has gotten involved, and you and I were back at HBC, and I remember having this conversation in the credit card group about what exactly data you need to capture. And speaking of HBC, I think they're a Capital One client, as is Costco. So that's an unfortunate call to receive from your friends at Capital One for both those retailers. So we wish them the best of luck. But this article here from Krebs Security, which is a great site actually, because it really delves into a very analytical look at any of these things, and it's always a little frightening. But 1 million SIN numbers apparently at risk, and I guess that's what's problematic. So I guess the ultimate is, do you really need that information? Because it does feel. I mean, you've been associated with big tech firms, IBM, Microsoft, and it's just no matter how good the tech is, it just feels like it's one bad employee away from one of these things, eh?
It really is. And despite the best work that you can do with technology to protect everyone's interests, when it comes down to social engineering and the activities of somebody who's trying to do something destructive, it's pretty hard to defend against that.
At a Retail Council of Canada event, we had the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer from Home Depot, and he was telling us how he arrived there, and one of the first things he did was he spread out a few USB keys in the parking lot. And sure enough, a couple of people put them in their computers. Like, it's, you can have as much.
Scary, isn't it?
Well, it's just. I think that'll happen less and less. But it's from compromised people to whatever the story of this person is who's been arrested, who did this. And then there's a connection to AWS there. She is an ex, or he is an ex. AWS, that could be a random data point, or that could be meaningful. Early days, but for sure we'll keep an eye on that. Let's see what else. Farm Boy, I put this article in here, Farm Boy taking over Freshco locations in Newmarket. And, I threw that into some Canadian grocer. I threw that in not because it's entirely that meaningful that a grocer is opening up a single store, but I think what's meaningful to me is that it highlights the Empire Sobeys, Michael Medline's approach to Farm Boy, which is, Farm Boy, Jeff York does such a great job. I know you know the Farm Boy team. It's finding real estate, right? I mean, it's really about finding the real estate. So I thought this was interesting in as much as we're going to take existing, I guess, is what they find underperforming real estate or whatever, and convert it into a Farm Boy. Have you ever shopped at a Farm Boy, Dave?
I have, and what I find really interesting about this, and this is where you can give a lot of credit to the team at Sobeys, is the way that they have found a banner that's very different from what they're doing with Freshco, with the typical, the traditional Sobeys stores, and they want to maintain that look and feel. It's a very different banner for them, and so being able to continue to do that and yet continue to spread it out with this acquisition, I think, is a great move on their part.
I think it really signals the future to come. I mean, I think Michael Medline talked about them as just such a. I think he described them as an urban weapon almost, in as much as the Sobeys has got some of these urban stores. There's actually one near the headquarters of RCC, and it's it's a small store, but it revitalized with the Farm Boy, and Jeff York and his team does such a great job. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. What
will also be interesting to watch as time goes on is what they take from that banner and try to incorporate into the larger Sobeys locations.
Would you put? Farm Boy's big on private label. I mean, a vast percentage of the goods there are private label. Would you put those in a Sobeys or an Empire or a Freshco store? Would you do that?
Well, it's interesting because Sobeys already has our compliments, and you want to be careful that you don't confuse the consumer with two house brands. But maybe there's a different story to be told with the Farm Boy name, and that can be set up to be a different kind of shopping experience or different type of product line that would be available from Sobeys other than what people would normally see. So it could be a positive thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, because you've got lots of private labels, and it gets it some interesting brand. And do you keep it whole, or do you like President's Choice? Right, you go to discount banners and you find President's Choice product as well. So it's not. I'm sure they're thinking about it, but I'm also sure they're going to take their time in figuring that out.
I think taking their time on it is a good idea, because we've seen lots of examples with other retailers who jump into something quickly. I certainly don't get the impression that the folks at Sobeys are going to do this hastily.
We'll get back to Sobeys. There's more news about Sobeys later on in the news. Jumping into international, from the New York Times, great article about how Whole Foods has not satisfied Amazon's grocery appetite. What a great title. It's not better than my favorite title of all time. My favorite newspaper headline of all time? Headless man found in topless bar. New York Post, 1969 in New York City. Headless man found in topless bar. No one's ever going to write a better byline than that. But that's this is kind of fun. Anyway, this is from the New York Times talking about how Amazon, they bought Whole Foods, right? What is it, about 2 years ago? And Whole Foods really 400 stores. And I know you've got experience in the U.S. dealing with the Krogers of the world, who are just massive, right? And to be fair, Whole Foods did a great job a decade ago plus of creating category, really recreating categories, organics, but really they kind of got lapped, right? I mean, the bigger players like the Krogers of the world just set a scale that was just hard for them to compete. Amazon buys them. But there's rumors, and it talks about it in here, that Amazon's going to open up another grocery store, right? That Whole Foods is not enough. Because if you think about the cultures, and cultures well coming from many big companies, culture is a big deal, right?
Well, and a lot of people who, prior to the acquisition, shopped at Whole Foods continued to do that. And there's a certain profile that they have. So it'll be interesting to see if Amazon does set their sights on another grocer. Would it be a complementary profile? Would it be someone who's different? Would it be, it's hard to see somebody being upscale of Whole Foods. Maybe it's a discount brand.
Yeah, I don't think they'd go up. I mean, I don't think there's up from Whole Foods for sure. I mean, you and I had a coffee in Dean and DeLuca in New York City last time we were there. It's gone now. I mean, Dean and DeLuca, they got bought by I think some international Thai owner, and that they've just not done well. It's just too high end. But I what'll be interesting to see is if they do buy anyone, or if they just greenfield it, right? Just start themselves. God, it's not like they have shortage of capital or funds, right? So they can do whatever they want.
Well, it'll also be interesting to see what they do in the way of incorporating some of their other work. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any element of the Amazon Go stores that they build into that, or the Amazon 4-star store. So maybe we'll find 4-star carrots that you just have to get.
Yeah. And I should add that if you want to delve into that a bit deeper, episode of The Voice of Retail, I interviewed former co-CEO Walter Robb on the Main Stage store, and he talks a little about Amazon. Moving on, Vogue Business talks about a $400 billion adaptive clothing opportunity. I'd never heard of this term. Had you heard of that term before, adaptive clothing?
What is it? Maybe for the listeners, I think it's a good thing to share.
Yeah, it's clothing oriented towards physically disabled people. So there's a picture image here, and it talks about it in the article with Tommy Hilfiger and a woman pictured in a wheelchair. Then it's clothing designed for disabled and other issues, physically disabled people. So I'd never heard of this term, never really thought of it. But this article talks about it being just a huge market, like $400 billion market. It's interesting. I'd never thought of it, but there you are.
Well, really, accessibility is something that's changing a lot, or people's recognition of the need for accessibility. And so that comes with products for home use, and it's just a natural progression from there to think about how fashions and clothing can be adapted for people who have certain needs because of their physical limitations. Yeah.
Interesting. Next article from Internet Retailing, Mothercare, which is a firm I'd never heard of, shows what closing 4 in 10 of its stores meant for cross-channel sales. So I put this in. There was a bit of discussion on LinkedIn about this. Basically, here's a retailer that said, well, I got too many stores. I'm going to close a bunch down, and then I'm going to make it up in online sales. And that just didn't work out, right? So, I guess this gets to be what we're learning, and I guess is somewhat predictable, that just because, the stores have this vital role to play. You and I have walked through stores in New York and here, and, you start to understand like the Allbirds and these pure plays that are starting stores, just, they're a big marketing tool, right?
It is. And some of it is for the people running the stores and running the online business to understand how can we feed one another and make each other successful. You and I have often talked, and I do a number of my presentations on how the successful retailers of the future are the ones who are going to successfully blur that line between the physical and the digital experience.
I had similar experiences a while ago when I was at the Shopping Channel, because the owned by Rogers Media, and you would sit with the executives at Rogers Media and say, well, listen, if so much of your business is coming from online, why don't you just shut the TV station down? You're getting great sales online, and we just said, well, listen, the two need to work together. Without the TV station, and I guess the analogy would be without the stores, the online is just going to dry up, and then you're then you're hostage, or then you got to invest in online. And I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I'm not sure you can invest enough online to make up for those sales. I think that's why you see so many pure plays starting up physical stores.
Well, yes, that's true. But I think the other thing about the physical store is people still look at that as a way to engage with the brand. It's a way to entertain yourself. And as easy as it is to buy things online and have them delivered to your door, we're social creatures. And we enjoy that experience. There's a lot of trust that you're able to generate as the retailer when you're face-to-face with the customer. These are things that are very hard to measure, but they're so important to the customer experience.
And our friend Doug Stevenson talks about that all the time, right? How do you measure experience per square foot? I mean, he talks about that as the most important metric. I don't know if that's the most important metric. I think he does pretty important, but he makes a good point about how do you capture that experience part. This next article, Standard Cognition from VentureBeat, I threw it in because it's really, and Walter Robb said this on the stage as well from Whole Foods, Amazon is not the only company working on the kind of shop it like you stole it technology. In fact, I think Microsoft, when you were at Microsoft, they even had technology. What was it? The Italian grocery store that would detect motion, and I guess it's all in this camera-based motion detection, right? So it's not like the exclusive purview of Amazon, right?
Absolutely not. There are a number of small companies working on that. The example that you just mentioned was Co-op Italia.
Right.
That was a little bit different. It wasn't for transactions, but it was a way to make a digital experience interactive for the consumer in the store. So you can look at it a couple of different ways, and all of them are ways that the store, through that idea that I was just talking about, blurring the line between physical and digital, every time you do that is another opportunity to collect information about the consumer behavior in the store, which is absolutely priceless.
Last article, I think it's the last article in the international section, is how Simons, the mall owner, is actually investing as a venture capital in some of its retailers, which is so interesting. So, the malls come under some criticism or just, under stress, and now they're actually investing in distressed situations. So I just, from CNBC, so pretty fascinating, right? That the mall owners actually take a stake in some of the retailers, right? I mean, that's a vertical integration for you, eh?
It is, and it's so important because as consumers, when we're walking through a mall and we see locations that have been closed up, it doesn't speak well for mall management. Yeah. And they want to do whatever they can to make their tenants be more successful. This is a smart move on their part.
It's interesting as you get to different and alternative business models. You think of the Indochinos of the world, for example, that they have mall-based stores that don't sell. So I think there's all kinds of different models out there for how people are innovating in retail. So let's move on to independent news of retail entrepreneurs. So there's a few things I'd touch on from Retail Insider, Craig Patterson's Retail Insider, independent retailers struggling for survival. So it's a good article. It just says it's tough. It's tough. It's tough to be an independent retailer, but there's still hope, I guess. If I look at these four articles together, really, there's a lot of innovation happening for independent retailers, but it's tough for them, right? I mean, the good news is, and I'd love your thoughts on this, kind of a lot of the technology has leveled the playing field for indies. But that doesn't make it any easier, right? I mean,
It doesn't, because they don't have the scale of the big monster retailers like Kroger's. But the thing they do have in their favor is that they're nimble. Right. And so they can try something, they can do it quickly. A lot of technology that will help the retailer isn't that expensive if you do it properly. And so in those situations, they can try things and fail fast, as we often say, and do it in a way that's not going to put the business at risk.
Next section, retail sustainability. So the couple articles that jump out on me, and this is big news this week, Sobeys announcing that they were going to phase out all plastic bags by 2020. I mean, you and I were talking earlier in the week, the whole plastics thing is really, it's been percolating, so to speak, for many years, but it's really seeming to hit, so to speak, a boiling point or a melting point where it's got big momentum behind it, right?
It's almost reached, as you say, a tipping point where the consumer has raised their voice, the retailers are hearing them, and when you look at some of the original solutions that retailers are coming up with now, like this example that we have of a supermarket in Vietnam using banana leaves to wrap other fruits and vegetables.
Isn't that interesting, right?
It is. It's compostable. It's natural. This is the kind of interesting and original thought that you have to get past that thing that we've become so familiar with, which is the garbage bags, the plastic bags that come from the grocers.
And boy, Sobeys' move, it's going to eliminate 225 million bags at their 255 stores. So, no small move. Not everyone's going to do the same thing in the same ways, but and as you said, the next thing to take on in grocery stores and retail is the plastic film that wraps so many of the things. But the interesting thing is, and I spent some time at Dixie Cup, and the funny history of Dixie Cup. They were invented to stop the spread of cholera because people were using the same cups to drink water, in the first part of the century. So all these plastics have a use. So it'll be interesting to see over the next number of years how this all. I think, my advice to grocers, stop shrink wrapping cucumbers. That's a good place to start.
Well, I think we'll see a lot of things change because it's going to start with retailers who have their own house brands that they're going to look at the packaging. And that's as big a part of the problem as it is the bags that we carry merchandise out from the store in. It's the packaging that's often caused a lot of throwaway challenges. Now, once they start doing that, the ripple effect will be that the CPGs are going to start looking at what can we do for all of this merchandise that we're helping to package.
Yeah, last couple of articles, and then we'll kind of wrap up. It's been a ton of fun, Dave. Thanks for joining me on this on the podcast. The Urban Outfitters are doing a rental program for apparel. Apparel, of course, has got its own sustainability issues. Calgary Co-op eliminating plastic bags, but they're giving compostable bags that people pay for. And so these are all coming together. It's really such interesting times in retail. Dave, you and I have been covering the retail beat in one way, shape, or form for many, many years. If people want to reach out and get in touch with you and chit and chat, what's the best way to reach out to you, Dave? Is it LinkedIn? Is that the best way to get a hold of you?
I think LinkedIn's probably best. I've got a pretty active profile there and always looking at expanding my network and meeting other people who are passionate about the industry. So please feel free to connect with either one of us if you haven't already. And we look forward to creating even more networks.
Well, that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. You can also ask your favorite home devices, Amazon Echo, Google Home, to play the most recent edition, though it doesn't really look at my data. Nobody ever does. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of M.E. LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on meleblanc.co, of course on LinkedIn. And Dave, once again, Dave Rodgerson, thanks so much for joining me as my first ever very special co-host on this edition of the Voice of Retail podcast.
This was great, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone, have a great week.